yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. How's it going? I think it, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm on real time with Bill Maher on Friday. Oh, no, I'm saying I watched on TV. Red Planet, yeah. No, no. Definitely a quiet taste. Yeah. Thomas famous for doing these controversial spaces. So, that's amazing. Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, given that I spent some of my time at Sean Raleigh, it's nice. Bill Maher, well, yeah, yeah, insane. My biggest obsession is my foreign accent. They like white British foreigners, and they still yeah, I think the accent means actually the enemy of oh, you're British, you're fine. And I'm like, I actually sit there with a pen, saying, we should burn down all the newspapers. But you realize I'm from a newspaper, but somehow they regard me as different. So, but yeah, they are very weird things. Marketing events, like like a concert, like a car rally. I've only seen it on TV, but I get the feel it's similar. And it's a bit of a sporting event. I'm going to cheer everything from there to everything from the Democrats. Sure. And then, yeah, there's all this strange music from the Oscar, Elton John, Queen, a lot of Elvis. Hi, they do. Yeah. 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 That's about 9 years ago. Quite a period of but I'm sure that people will say to me, oh, we're to be leaving Africa behind with fragile democracies. Here's the Civil War. Go somewhere stable.
So secure.
Yeah, exactly. How long has he been here?
I actually just had my sister yesterday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, cute.
Um, right.
Choice.
From somewhere. Yeah. Really? Oh, strange. Yeah. Yeah, well, I went to Iowa, South Carolina, something else went to Alabama. But yeah, I feel very lucky with this job that I spent a lot of time in the Midwest, which is many tourists. It's very, a cliche, but yeah, I mean, very different opinions and views that are often inside that Washington bubble. Most famous example we went around those cities all the art signs everywhere, rang an alarm bell on whatever the interesting. How,
Great to meet you.
you too, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone in the room. Good morning to our online audience as well. My name is Patrick Gaspard. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for American Progress, and I'm absolutely thrilled this morning that we have an extraordinary guest, an exceptional public servant, and my former colleague in the Obama administration, Representative Khanna. Thank you so much, and welcome to our building. There's so much I'm going to get to say about the congressman, but I want to give you a sense of the conversation that we're going to have today. We all know, of course, that the global economy is racing to a fundamental, mind-altering, kind of existential cliff with the advent of generative AI. But we're also at this moment when the voice of workers and collective bargaining and a sense of dignity at work is also ascendant. Part of the conversation that we'll have with the congressman is about how those two worlds kind of collide and meet one another. And we're going to talk about some really important legislation that he aims to introduce shortly that I think does the work of convergence in that space. The congressman has asked me to be brief in introducing him, but he does so many amazing things, and he's just so darn cool that I don't want to sell him short. So I'll just give you some sense of his efforts and his service. He has served the good people of California's 17th Congressional District since 2016. He serves on the Armed Services Committee as a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Cyber Technologies and Information Systems, and is co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on India and Indian Americans. He also serves on the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and Communist China, and on the Oversight and Accountability Committee, where he previously chaired the Environmental Subcommittee. I could go on and on about all of the books that he's written, but I'll just say that I really think of the congressman as an insurgent institutionalist, somebody who's really standing up our democratic organizations, our democratic DNA, but he's interrogating, he's asking really hard questions all the time, and he's probing to see how we can push out the envelope to truly make this a more inclusive society. So, Congressman, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Insurgent institutionalist, I like it. I'm going to take that line. I have long admired Patrick Gaspard. I was a junior person in the Obama administration, and I looked up to Patrick because Patrick was a part of the president's inner circle and then, of course, served us in South Africa. And he has emerged now to lead CAP, not just an extraordinary organization, but as a thinker. And I don't want to dwell on it. He became and spoke to the House Democratic Caucus, and half the caucus was asleep until he started to speak, because he actually challenged people to think about our economic policy and our future. And so I'm just honored to be here in conversation with you.
You're very kind, Congressman, and no one's ever thought of you as a junior staffer, ever, anywhere that you...
I started, well, you know what, it's important to know this, because President Obama, he didn't just appoint people at the top. He appointed about 100 folks like me, young folks, starting as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and that gave us a start in our political careers. And I think he will one day, but he doesn't get enough credit for what he did in giving so many people, Raja, me, many others, a shot like that.
I agree with a composition of a administration that looked and felt like America and all of its complexities. Congressman, when I first met you back then, I think I would describe you as a tech optimist in all the ways that we all made a set of assumptions about the virtuous cycle for our democracy and our economy that would come out of the advancements in big tech. Since then, I think that there's a more measured approach that you have to the promise of tech and what it ought to mean for workers. And I hear you both in your rhetorical approach, but in your public policy setting as well, always thinking about who's being left behind in this moment, in the revolution, I can only call it that, that we're all experiencing. You're about to introduce a bill on the floor called the Steel Modernization and Decarbonization Act. I want to ask you all about that. I want to really dig into it. But before we go there, I want to just kind of pull back the lens a little bit and telescope out. I want to give you an opportunity, Congressman, to give us a sense of how you're reading the landscape. You have this really powerful way of injecting a kind of morality and sometimes even a spirituality in your economic analysis. So in this moment, when I've heard you say that the marketplace really needs to consider its obligation to community, its obligation to place, at a moment when the markets really seem to emphasize only the bottom line quarter to quarter. How are you thinking about all of this, and what it should all mean for policymakers like us?
I was talking to a tech executive back in California recently, and I represent a district of $10 trillion of market value. Google, Apple, Intel, NVIDIA, Tesla, all in that district. And he had done really well, and he was going back to his hometown of Fort Wayne. And he said he went back to his hometown of Fort Wayne for his 50th high school reunion, and every single person in his class had a life that was worse than their parents, and every one of their kids was going to have a life that was worse than his classmates' lives. This is the challenge in our country. We rank today 128th in terms of inequality, global inequality. China is at 77, Great Britain, Canada around the 30s. I mean, it's not just the Scandinavian countries in the top 10. We used to be about 40 or 50 in the 1980s. We're 128th. And you can't have, in my view, a cohesive multiracial democracy, which is the aspiration of the country, if you don't have people participating in the modern economy. And for so long, we didn't care. We watched as place after place was hollowed out. Would we ever say the country doesn't need Wall Street? Let London do all of the finance? The country doesn't need Hollywood? Let Bollywood make all the movies? Or country doesn't need tech? Let Estonia do all the tech, Baltics do all the tech. But we did that with manufacturing. We watched industry after industry hollowed out. It first happened in black communities. William Julius Wilson warned about it. Truly disadvantaged. Then it started happening, and he talked about despair. People didn't care as much. Then it started happening in white working communities, class, and then people wrote the same thing. That's a despair. And my view is we need to create economic pride again, give people a sense of a part of the modern economy. And if we do that, that's one of the ways that maybe we can start to bring this country together.
That's powerful. I'd love to hear you articulate how you think that members of Congress and the White House attempted to do just that with IRA, infrastructure, the CHIPS Act, whether or not we're getting at that thing that you're defining right now, and why perhaps it has not been as resonant as some of us assumed it might be.
I think the president, people around him, Ron Klain, others, that this was a deep focus for them, that they were going to figure out how we were going to bring manufacturing industry back to communities. And let me tell you what I think we did well and where I think we can do better. What we did well is pass things like the Chips and Science Act, where the semiconductor industry, which had been offshored, is now, thanks to President Biden, coming back in Arizona, in Ohio, in upstate New York. We passed an infrastructure bill to create extraordinary construction, advanced construction jobs in community after community, many of them in the South and in the Midwest. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, where you see new battery plants that are coming, new electric vehicle plants coming in across the country. Someone said, okay, you guys are building cathedrals. It takes time. So part of it is it's not immediate. It's not speaking to immediate pocketbook needs. But I also think we did not involve public-private partnerships enough. Let me give you a concrete example. I am partnering with Jennifer Clyburn, who is Representative Clyburn's daughter, and HBCUs, 38 HBCUs in the South, with Google, that's creating a $5,000 scholarship, 18-month credential, $65,000 job. They've done it for 100 kids so far. We're going to have a summit on September 30th with about 38 HBCUs to expand it. And we go down and you talk to young folks and you talk about what they're getting in their credentials, the jobs they're getting, the stories they have. Now, this president's given $7 billion to HBCUs, but no one knows about it. We're not talking because it's not as visible, the communities aren't there, the private sector isn't there. I said, why not convene 100 top technology business leaders, go down and start to get them involved in the economic growth and the wealth generation and the ability of people to feel the future. And so I think, one, we need to have the involvement of the private sector. Two, we need to be more place-based. You can't give a speech on Biden economics in Chicago. Chicago's fine. What about Galesburg, Illinois? What about Johnstown, Pennsylvania? By the way, have we gone and asked these communities that were deindustrialized what they want? They don't want battery plants. I love battery plants. They don't want electric vehicles. I love electric vehicles. Did we ever ask them after they left, what are the kind of jobs you want to see? What would you like to do to partner? We haven't had those conversations. And we could get into my bill, but I mean, I
promised you were going to get there.
Well, no, but
Setup.
Here's the setup for it. Think about going, if this president, and I've tried to make the case, maybe Cap will get him to adopt it, but think if he was the president. Donald Trump said, you can't have a country without steel or aluminum. That was his line. If Joe Biden is the president who's bringing steel back, actually, because Trump did nothing about it. And it's not the old steel, it's the modern steel, direct reduction iron, hydrogen, and you put it in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, you put it in Ashtabula, Ohio, you put it in Downriver, Michigan, and you say, this is not just about the number of jobs. Larry Summers will do a calculator. Oh, there are only 83,000 steel jobs. There are 10 million healthcare jobs. And I said, what about pride? What about hope? What about the community coming back? What about our country? These are the things that move people's souls, not spreadsheets. And I have said, why not start to bring this new industry back in these communities? And that's what this bill is about.
That's fantastic. All right, so I promise you we're 2 questions away from from the bill. But that's all really powerfully said, and I want to go back to the conversation that we were having at the House caucus retreat. I was thinking about you that day because you have this powerful notion of progressive capitalism, and I wonder how that runs up against your idea and our broad notions as progressive of the public good. I saw this interesting experiment that you tried recently where you took public transportation from Fremont to Cupertino, which should be like a 30-minute ride, was I think almost 2.5 hours for anybody who doesn't have the privilege of having an automobile. So I'm wondering about why you did that, taking up that example and centering into your broad notion of how progressive capitalism meets the public good, what the obligations are on both sides of that divide. And then I want you to use that as a segue into this bill you're introducing, what it means and why now. See, I told you we'd get there.
You're just asking it in a deeper way, which I appreciate. So I am a believer in innovation. I'm a believer in entrepreneurship. I'm a believer in wealth generation. And I think the party needs to be a party that that fosters wealth generation in communities across this country. But unrestricted markets, as we've had, with no sense of what it's going to take at the public good, has led to some people prospering and having opportunity, and other places hollowed out. An unrestricted market doesn't mean that you're going to have wealth generation in every community or opportunity. It led to concentration of wealth in places like Silicon Valley and LA and New York, and many communities not participating. And then, all these people in Silicon Valley, you've met them all, were self-made. I said, yeah, you're not Donald Trump. You didn't have millions of dollars given to you. I said this to Indian America, to my parents or in-laws, but come on. You had health care. You had an education. You had advanced degrees. In many cases, you didn't have, you could drop out, but you had a Harvard degree, you were admitted to Harvard. I'm not saying you're not self-made, but let's look at what the basics are to get there, to participate in the market. That is what FDR called, or Dr. King called, an economic bill of rights. And it's not complicated. We want everyone to have health care. We want everyone to have education. We want everyone to have child care. We want to make sure you have good schools, good public transportation. That's all the Democrats stand for. That's all we stand for, giving people a fair shot to be part of this market economy. And whether you're from Bernie Sanders to Joe Biden and right in between, that's the core unifying message of the Democratic Party. We want everyone to have basic dignity, to have a shot at the economic future. And that, to me, is what I call progressive capitalism in terms of we do want the wealth generation, we do want the entrepreneurship, but we've got to give people a fair shot, and that includes strong public transportation.
So let's talk about the Steel Modernization and Decarbonization Act. I love the sound of it. What is it? What does it do? How will average Americans benefit from it? And why are you introducing it in this interesting moment that we find ourselves in?
So the bill is pretty simple. It's basically a version of what we did for semiconductors, but doing it for advanced steel. One of the things that I found so disheartening when I was out in Ohio at one point on one of my trips on talking about industrialization is someone said, this Khanna guy's talking about making things in America. I thought that was a Donald Trump thing. I said it was an FDR thing. It really was. FDR industrialized this country. It was racially exclusive. I mean, it took Johnson to get the FDR New Deal to be more inclusive. But basically, women were in the factories. FDR said, and by the way, we had universal child care then, because when the women were in the factories, people said, who are going to take care of the kids? So the country suddenly had the resolve to make 3,000 war nurseries for child care. But what FDR had said is, we're going to have financing of corporations. Those corporations are going to produce, and they're going to pay a good wage. We're going to have housing and take care of the community. The unemployment rate falls from about 15, 16% around 1940 to 4.2% right when FDR starts industrialization. And so the model is there. And that's the Steel Act, which costs about $10, $12 billion, says, let's have financing to critical steel companies and with the United Steelworkers to build the modern steel plants in towns that were legacy towns of steel that will not have the blast furnaces, but will have either hydrogen or direct reduction iron like we have in a Toledo plant. And these plants are going to be better for carbon. So you got a lot of the environmental groups and environmental climate folks are excited about it. It's going to actually bring 500 to 1,000 jobs in these communities. And it's going to allow the United States in a place where we have demand for certain types of steel, for the electric grid, for the heavy armed steel that we need for our military to be made in the United States. And that's why now, because I've been pushing this idea for a couple of years, but I think we have to be concrete in what we're going to do in a second term when President Biden wins for communities in this country that still feel left out. Look, Johnstown's not getting a semiconductor plant. They're not going to get a fab plant there. And they don't have any battery plants there, but they've done steel. Why not do a modern steel plant? Why not do other types of modern factories? Why not bring some of the new technology jobs that won't all require a 4-year degree to those communities? I have said, and I did this with Rubio, National Economic Development Council at the White House, that should look district by district on what we need to do to bring new economic industry into that district. And not all if it has to be manufacturing, but we need to be intentional about it. We have never been intentional in this country, probably since the New Deal, about creating high-paying, good-paying jobs in communities that are left out.
Congressman, what's the level of investment do you think we're talking about here? What's the scale at which both government and the private sector, an incentivized private sector, will have to double down on a set of investments to achieve the North Star goals that you're describing?
Well, in the steel industry, it starts with 6 to 10, which is steel plants, which is about 12 billion, $15 billion. The CHIPS Act was about 45 billion. But this is where Rubio and I disagree. We have a National Economic Development
I'm sure there are
Council.
more than a few places where you and Rubio disagree.
He wants 20 billion over 10 years. I want 2 trillion over 10 years. So the numbers are a bit off. But the point is, we can start with identifying where we have new industry and a need for new technology, and also have the private sector at the same time. And be intentional of being the party. The thing that pains me, and I know it pains you from your comments at the Democratic caucus, we're 10 to 15 points down on the economy as a party. That should not be the case. We are the party of the future of economic growth. We are the party of economic revitalization. We are the party that's going to give people a shot at the American dream. And if we're 10 to 15 points down on the economy, there's a problem. And it's either a problem in policy or it's a problem in communication or both. But it should be a wake-up call to our party, even if we win, and we should win on many other issues. We should not cede the economic argument to a Republican Party that has talked about deregulation and tax cuts as its solution.
Let's talk about specific ways that your bill would address the race to the bottom that needs to become a race to the top. I've seen you talk in the past about the over 200,000 jobs in software administration that should be in this country that's been farmed out elsewhere. You're on the competitiveness subcommittee. We all know what's happening with Chinese steel, and there are many people who disagree with Donald Trump on just about everything, but agreed with him on the steel tariffs against China. We're at a point now where, as you've noted, we have just a historic level disparity between the productivity gains that are accruing to the benefit of workers versus what's going to CEOs. So in your bill and how you're approaching this moment, how are you addressing that kind of imperative that we have to be competitive in the world, but also trying to figure out ways to drive up wages at the same time? How are you thinking about it in the context of this bill?
So one of the advantages that I think the country has with technology and with AI is it actually allows us to do things at a huge productivity advantage. Now, there is a challenge in it. The new steel mills, and we got to be honest about it, are probably not going to have 4,500 jobs in a blast furnace. Maybe they'll have 500 to 1,000 jobs. And that productivity is allowing, in part, the competitiveness to reindustrialize and bring them back to the United States. Because if someone was out there promising that we were going to bring the jobs back of old, that would be a lie. And that's really partly what Trump ran on. Let's just bring the old stuff back. We'll open up the coal mines again, and he never did. And I ask you, how many new steel plants came up under Donald Trump? See, that's how I'd run, how we should run against him. I mean, everyone knows the other stuff. He wants to subvert democracy, and he's horrible on so many issues. But what about his basic promise? He said, look, where's your place in America? You've gotten shafted. And that anger was legitimate. Factory town after factory town closed. Communities were shafted. And he said, I'm going to bring this back. Okay, you had 4 years. Where are the new steel plants? Where are the new aluminum plants? Where are the new factories? At least Joe Biden's trying. Okay, we didn't get steel. We got semiconductors. We got batteries. We're starting. Okay, you want Joe Biden to reverse 40 years of deindustrialization in 3 years? Come on. Yeah, you're not feeling great about it because for 40 years the party's made a mistake and hollowed you out. Joe Biden's first president who says, let's reverse course. Now, why did Trump not? It's not that Trump, it's not even that I think Trump didn't want those jobs to come back. It's just you can't get the jobs to come back just with a tariff. You think you put a tariff on, and I'm not opposed to the tariff. It's one part of the strategy. But how are you going to get the money for the plant? How are you going to get the money for the workforce in Johnstown? This is not reinventing the wheel. The way America built America from Hamilton to Lincoln to FDR is the government financing of these plants with workers in a way that was going to lead to industrialization. And I think the Democratic Party should just say, we have the American plan. I think that's actually what it was called. Fine, Donald Trump got the diagnosis of no factories, but he's got no solution. We're the party of solutions. And to me, I still believe in the American public. I believe in the electorate. I think we got to just make the argument for why our economic vision is better.
It's interesting hearing you put so much emphasis on industrial policy making. I think it was Ezra Klein who described you as the foreign policy ambassador for Silicon Valley. And so I wonder about the tension between the old economy and the new economy and how you're trying to make the old economy into the new economy, particularly because if we're, I'm noting your candor here, and if we're candid about where we are and where we're going into the future, for the last 40 years, productivity gains in the industrial space really have been possible because of the new efficiencies that you get out of labor, out of the workforce. But the productivity gains of the next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be on steroids as a consequence of generative AI. So it's not really the same as those profits being generated by workers in the same way. We saw a Goldman Sachs report, was it last year, that said that 2/3 of current jobs are going to feel some pressure of automation as a consequence of generative AI. So how are you thinking about the new kind of productivity gain and what that ought to mean for collective bargaining, for the rights of workers, as the foreign policy ambassador for Silicon Valley, if it's fair for Ezra Klein to have given you that that nickname?
Well, I'm proud of representing Silicon Valley. I think there may be people there who think that there are other ambassadors as well. But I would say two things. One, on the productivity gains, even on steel, it's really important that workers get part of the productivity. That, to me, was all what the UAW strike or the writer's strike was about. Okay, we have less jobs and we have higher returns, but who's getting those returns? It shouldn't just be the executives. We used to have a time at Sears Roebuck where you could retire as a sales representative in 1968 with the equivalent of $1 million in today's money because everyone had equity. And it's important in this new industrial policy or whatever label you want to put in it, that we have a place for workers participating and benefiting from the gains of productivity. But we have to be honest about the two aspects, that technology is generating a lot of the wealth of a modern society. 35% of the stock market gains have been tech-driven. And we've got to create opportunities not just in industry, but for technological proficiency, because you're going to need technology, whether you are in manufacturing or whether you're in retail or whether you're in some form of healthcare or whether you're a form of education. And this is part of what the president did with broadband and trying to get every community linked, but that's just table stakes. We should be having a technology class required in every grade. Doesn't mean everyone has to learn how to code, but they do need to have some familiarity with technology, and you start to see this divide soon in kindergarten of people who are exposed or not. You know, the saddest thing to me when I travel the country, Patrick, is when you ask kids in my school district, are you optimistic about America? 90% of the hands go up. 90% of the hands go up. They think the world's their oyster. And you go to other communities, 20, 30%. And in part is the divide of economic opportunity. And the reality is this is the time more people can get technology jobs without having to know linear algebra or calculus, because the AI does all of that. You know, it used to be with the power loom in the Industrial Revolution, you had to know how to operate the power loom. And the power loom operators used to make a lot. And then everyone figured out how to operate the power loom. We're getting to that point of technology. And so how do we credential people in the basics of technology? And it's important not just from the Rust Belt and the communities that were left out of deindustrialization. It's important for Black and Latino communities. And I think this is where our party is missing a message to young voters of color. They have the same dreams. They want to build wealth for their families. They want to have a house. Some of them want to build a small business. Some of them want to get capital. What is our agenda to them for economic empowerment? People say there's so much of a challenge of Bitcoin or crypto in America. I say for most Americans, that's the closest they're going to get to a friends and family round in technology. They aren't having VCs come and say, invest in the next AI company. They aren't sitting on those boards. They don't know the VCs. I used to joke, I taught at Stanford, like kids would get funded before they had an idea because they had the Stanford email address. We need to expand the opportunities of modern wealth generation in these communities. And the last point, Patrick, people say, oh, bro, you Silicon Valley, this comes off as elitist if you go to communities that talk about technology and modern wealth generation. I said, what's elitist is not talking about it. They know where the wealth is being generated. They're just excluded from those opportunities.
That's such a great point, and I've been impressed with the way you've gone into rural communities, you've gone into West Virginia, and you say the same things in West Virginia that you say in Silicon Valley. It's a terribly important thing to carry the conversation in that way. Speaking of carrying the conversation, I want to invite the audience into the Q&A, but I have one final question for you, because there's something that you touched on lightly, but we haven't been able to delve into it, and it's something that I know that you have some real passion about, and it's this notion of what childcare looks like. I always love the examples that you use. I love your Sears storytelling. Sears is the ultimate post-war baby boom economy that was possible because of the explosion of the middle class in this country, creating a new consumer base that Sears benefited wildly from. But it was also at a time when women traditionally were more in the home than they are now. We have important labor force penetration by women in the workplace, but the Women's Economic Playbook that CAP just released last week demonstrates that half of the population lives in childcare deserts, where you have one childcare slot for every 3 or more children who need slots. You talked about the proliferation of childcare centers during World War II when women were in the workplace. How are you thinking about this issue, which I know you are passionate about, which you think about all the time, and which you think is really important to generating the economic gains, the inclusive economic gains that you are confident we can generate and that we need for the future?
Well, Patrick, first let me pay you and Cap a compliment because your work on childcare has been extraordinary. And I'm hopeful that this will be a centerpiece of the president's second-term agenda. And he already laid that out in the beginning of it in his State of the Union speech. But, you know, this is a issue that affects real people and families. And I often joke around with people at the White House when they're talking about these junk fees and elimination of junk fees. I was like, fine, like eliminate the junk fees, that's good. But we're in big times. We need big solutions. People aren't thinking about, okay, they save me $50 on the airline so I don't have to pay a fee for my bags. They're thinking, why am I paying thousands of dollars on childcare? I was talking to someone in my district, $25,000 I've now cost as high in the Bay Area. 3 kids, $25,000 of their salary is going on childcare. And we know when at post-COVID, if we had a rational society in response, our first bill, because we knew that the problem was that women were not in the workforce, the real infrastructure bill would have been childcare. That's what it would have gotten in return to the workforce. Just looking at the numbers, and it shows, you know, all of us, including me, everyone, it still has a, we still have gender bias in policy making. But if we were just looking, if there was an economic analysis and we said, what would we do first? It should have been childcare. And childcare is something which is pro-family. It is something you can get bipartisan consensus on. It is something that gets people back into the workforce. It's an investment at the most important time in a person's life. You don't have to, Hillary Clinton used to quote James Heckman, who won the Nobel Prize at Chicago, and has shown over and over again that by the age of 5, the investments you're making are the most important. And then people say, you want to pay childcare workers more at $20 an hour? I said, wouldn't you want people who are taking care of kids between 0 to 5 being paid more? I mean, don't we want the best possible people taking care of kids, which is going to determine their entire future in terms of their vocabulary, in terms of their emotional well-being? And so I think we go big on childcare. I'm proposing something which is modeled on Canada, childcare at $10 a day. It was $300 a month. But we could figure out what the specific plan is, and then do it. And that, to me, would be the next big social investment in families that the Democratic Party can make, and I think would be not just wildly popular, but good for the education of our kids, good for families, and good for jobs.
Here, here. It's so radical of you to inject the notion of rationality in public policy making. We appreciate that, Congressman.
I'm waiting for the moment, the rationality moment.
Let's take some questions from our wonderful audience. Do we have a microphone to pass around? Oh, we have a question from a reporter.
Hi, David Smith of The Guardian. Just wonder, there's obviously a gap between the economic statistics on GDP growth and jobs, and then, as you're saying, the perception of the public and the opinion polls. What is going on there? Is it because inflation is just still hitting people so hard in certain areas? Is it because of a perception of the Democratic Party as favoring coastal elites and people with college degrees, and what should be done about it?
It's a great question, a fair question. In most other countries, people always throw out the incumbents. When I was growing up, I used to visit India, and it was a terrible thing being an incumbent. It's not like here, where incumbency is good. And I think that the reality is that we're living in an anxious time because people feel that the American dream has slipped away. See, Trump captured something that I thought was very dangerous. He captured the sentiment that many people have in this country that their parents' life was better, and he married that nostalgia with a form of nativism. You know what? Back then, the country also was different demographically, the time you remember more fondly. And we have a very difficult task because we've got to convince people that the future of America is going to be better for them. I don't think economics solves everything, but I think if people were convinced that this is going to lead to prosperity for them and the American dream for their kids, it moves us a step closer to a multiracial, cohesive, multiracial democracy. So one, I think we have to speak to the fact that your wages, yeah, the real wages are going up, but we understand your wages haven't kept up with the cost of healthcare, the cost of childcare, the cost of medical care, and the cost of education. And that we empathize with that. And, you know, the president is trying. In 2 years, he's not going to reverse the decline of the American dream that's happened for the past 40 years. But directionally, he's going in that direction. And in some ways, the president, I've suggested, others have suggested, the president, the 1936 Roosevelt speech, where Roosevelt does all this has accomplished all this with the New Deal, but he says 80% of the speech is what's wrong with the country and what needs to still be fixed. And I think saying, look, we're changing the direction, but it's going to take, it's not that we're going to finish the job in 8 years. This is America's project. How we're going to restore the American dream and create economic opportunity so that people can afford a house again, afford health care, afford education, have a good paying job in a modern economy.
And David, if I could add to what the congressman just said, I think it's really important for those who might be litigating campaigns this year to be able to set their accomplishments in the context of ongoing fights and to make a distinction between inflation and cost increases, right? For people, average person, inflation is this kind of inchoate thing that they think may have been caused by overheated economy, government making too many investments, but rising costs, they blame directly on General Mills. That's jacking up by twice the cost of the cereal that they're trying to buy for their kids, and they actually trust policymakers like Congressman Khanna to be on their side, to go after those corporations to bring costs down. The congressman mentioned the bank fees elimination to the tune of billions of dollars, like $170 per banking family. But it's really important to remind average American that the banks are suing Congress now to roll back those regulations, and that there are others on the other side who are supporting the interests of those banks. So contextualize the accomplishments in ongoing fights, which kind of obligates the person listening to be able to make a choice, and to talk about cost in a way that goes at Representative Khanna's sense of what runaway corporate greed has meant to the average working family. Hope that's okay.
I think that's very well said. That's why we need him out on the campaign trail.
No. Please. We love our think tank work.
Thank you, Congressman. Arlene Holt Baker. Hello, Patrick. I retired Executive Vice President of the AFL-CIO.
Thank you.
In listening to you.
There's nothing retired about her.
Well, I try to be, but something about loving this democracy won't let me. Congressman, in listening to you, I kept thinking about I Dream a World. And the world that you describe is a world that I think a lot of people would like to live in, but they've got to dream that world. And you talked about the partnership that you have with the steelworkers. And I wanted to know what other unions you're in partnership with in support of your bill.
Well, I appreciate very much you're saying that about I Dream a World. That's one of the highest compliments someone could say, because I think that hope and aspiration matter in a country. I mean, that to me is what's so challenging about our times. That as having been inspired by President Obama as a young person, the way we lose to Trump is if we allow Trump to define the narrative of America, a narrative of anger, of division, of dystopianism. I mean, he's changed the entire conversation after Obama. Obama was about the fulfillment of the dream, the fulfillment of Douglass and King and cohesive multiracial democracy for everyone. And maybe Obama thought it would take 100 years, but that was the trajectory. And then this guy comes in and suddenly it's who can punch harder, who can fight harder. I was on Bill Maher the other day, oh, you didn't hit hard enough. I said, what happened to aspiration, the hope, the dreams? Because that's what moves America, and I still believe in that. And I think that the other unions we worked with, UAW, were very much in partnership with on this bill and the economic development bill. The carpenters, IBEW, the host of the building trades. I mean, we need labor to be at the table. And one of the regrets I have with the Chips and Science Act is that, and I've been pushing with CWA that we need to have labor neutrality in these agreements. And I give your previous chair, John Podesta, some credit. I don't mind sharing this publicly. I don't think he'll mind. Sean Fain, he said someone first for the White House used to call him up and said, "Sean, I got great news for you." He said, "What is that?" We got billions of dollars and new battery plant, and it's going to a state which doesn't have unions. And Sean said, I was about to, that's not good news. And Sean, he can be pretty direct. And Podesta fixed it. Podesta and a few people fixed it. They said, okay, you want to give these grants out, there better be labor neutrality. There better be a sense that labor has a seat at the table. Otherwise, it's going to come off as corporate welfare. So that is something that I think we have to learn the lessons that we didn't get it right in the beginning. Now it's, I think, in a much better place, and certainly on any of the economic development, the unions have to be front and center, so you have the labor neutrality, at least in these agreements.
I'll make a plug for my old union because I know that you've worked closely with SEIU, especially on this notion of how the old industrial policy meets the new care economy. So we really appreciate it.
And we worked and created the Fast Food Council in California. And so, the labor movement is one of the things that gives me hope in this country. You talk to the young folks at Starbucks, at union organizing, with UAW, and I don't want to talk about foreign policy, but I will say thank you to some of those unions who have had the moral courage to stand up for what's going on in Gaza. And they've also, I've had a lot of fancy degrees in my life, but I said, you want to learn about moral values, go to working families. They often get it right. When you get too many degrees, you start thinking about all the political consequences. When you're often a working person, you just think what's right or wrong. And so I think they often have the right moral sense.
Indeed.
We're going to take a question from our online audience first.
Yep. So what should the average American do now to adjust to the new AI-driven economy that's coming fast? And what should we be doing with our kids to make sure that they're prepared?
It's a great question. One, I think to expose people at a young age to technology in the right way. Doesn't mean go get them addicted to TikTok or Facebook or Twitter. There could be harms, and we need to regulate those harms. But to get people to understand how technology works, to have a comfort with being able to use technology, to do that from preschool to kindergarten to first grade is very important. To make the investments of technology in the schools and in the classrooms so that people have access to that technology. The amount of kids who I met at some of these rural community colleges or HBCUs who said the first time they got a computer, a laptop, was when they got to college, was sad. We need to make that accessible to everyone. And then we need to give people some technology literacy. Doesn't mean they have to know how to code, but technology literacy, like we have literacy in reading and like we have literacy in math. And that digital literacy should include what it means to be a digital citizen. We spend all this time thinking about how do you be social studies, how do we understand history, how do we understand different arguments? What about how we understand different things online? That's where most people are consuming the news. We should probably have a class on how do you sort through online news and know what's right or wrong, and how do you engage as a citizen in the online world. So those would be a few of my suggestions.
Now, Congressman, I know your time is pressed because you have to go and stave off efforts at impeachment that some are lifting up. But I'm hoping we can sneak in two more quick questions.
I'll be brief. I apologize. I usually love meeting everyone, but they've got us in yet another useless hearing on Hunter Biden. So I've got to show up for that.
Hi, thanks so much for this, Congressman. I'm Kate. I'm Director of LGBTQI+ policy here at CAP. When you're talking about all of these economies, especially in rural communities and across the country, I am thinking of LGBTQ folks and young folks who maybe don't feel welcome, right, in their economies, who don't feel welcome accessing the success, hopefully, of this future economy. And so I'm curious what we can be thinking about now to help those young folks feel more welcome in this future economy.
So one of the most inspiring things, and Marie maybe can share the video, we were doing this TechWise partnership in Allegheny Community College, and someone got up and talked about her experience in being on one of these teams and how she was working with folks in California and West Virginia and really felt a sense of belonging. And at the end of it, and I didn't even know, and she mentioned being trans, and she mentioned how being on this team working towards a goal in technology gave her a sense of purpose and a sense of identity, something that she actually struggled with in this community that she was with. And that's the hope for technology. There are a lot of downsides to technology, that we've congregated in groups that are filled with hate or that are filled with misinformation. But the hope was that you could be in part of a community, and maybe you wanted something different or you weren't feeling heard, and you found community online. And we can't forget the good of it and just emphasize the bad. What we have to do is figure out, how do we build productive, thoughtful communities? And one line on this: when the printing press came out, and people often don't remember the history, you know, they were the most vicious pamphlets. They make our politics look tame. I mean, they were pamphlets saying, go kill each other. There were 100 years of wars after the printing press. Erasmus, who was a champion of the printing press, turns out to be a big critic of the printing press. He said the printing press is going to kill any sort of humanism. It took human beings to create the institutions of liberal democracy to make the printing press something that all of us today would say is a good thing. We need to do the same thing digitally. We need to imagine what constructive community, constructive jobs look like in a digital age. How do we create the safe, thoughtful, inclusive spaces digitally? And I think that's a project for our generation.
The printing press is a great example where the notion of difference within a community surfaced as a consequence of the printed word and lifted up a kind of interesting divide and debate that led to the British Civil Wars. But eventually, it's the same technology, the same tools that create a sense of how you unite across differences as well and build that empathy. So it's a real challenge, and I really love that question for us. One very last quick question and quick response. I know that you have patiently had your hand up this entire time.
Very patient, because I feel my question is not as important as so many of these other questions that have been asked that are really great. I'm Brian. I'm on the health policy team here at CAP. You've talked about productivity and how it's the lack of it being shared with the workers. The benefits of productivity go to shareholders and whatnot, not the workers. In terms of money, what are your thoughts in terms of time, specifically a shorter work week? Advances in technology decades ago brought us the 40-hour work week. AI seems to be making this more urgent. People can do a lot more with a lot less time. So what are your thoughts on shortening the work week?
Brian, I'm open to it. I mean, Bernie Sanders actually just had a hearing with Sean Fain on exactly this topic. And Sean Fain said, why should all the gains of productivity be going to just the company executives, the workers, whether it's that they have better benefits, better pay, more time off, or potentially a shorter work week? I mean, those should all, the point is workers should have more dignity, whether it's in higher pay or whether it's in a shorter work week. So I'm open to that solution. And I just want to maybe end with this point and thank you, Patrick, for hosting such a thoughtful conversation. And I think what I appreciated about this conversation and what I think that the Democratic Party needs to do a better job of is the depth with which you started. What does this mean spiritually? What does this mean for a community? You know, so often we start with, you know, I'm for childcare. I'm for a 32-hour work week. I'm for building new steel plants. And we don't say, you know, why are people upset? Why are they anxious? Where is the country going? Where is the economy going? Where do they want to go? And how can we help them get there? And, you know, I think what you're doing in your individual capacity in CAP is trying to tell a story, to help people make sense of America and a sense of their future. And to me, that has to be what we all work towards doing better as a party. Because if we get to beat the anger and the frustration and the dystopian, it doesn't take genius to tell a Donald Trump story. You know, okay, people are upset, they're angry, I'm going to give them that anger. It does take a lot of hard work to tell a hopeful story. But if you tell that hopeful story, I have no doubt in this country the hopeful story wins if it's told well.
I couldn't provide a better encapsulation and a better ending. Thank you so much, Congressman, for your leadership and for the bill coming. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.